Hey, good evening. We're glad that you're joining us again on this Wednesday night for another study. John chapter 9 is where we're at today. So if you want to pull up your scripture on your devices or in your Bible, John chapter 9, we're going to be focusing on really the first 10 to 12 verses in John chapter 9 today. There's a ton going on in this chapter. To me, a lot of theology starts coming out in these very few verses, and we start to see the shift from the religion of the Jews at the time to a theology of what it means to follow Christ and to be a follower of His. And so we see in these few verses Jesus approach a man born blind, provide a healing to him, and then we get all kinds of questions that start to come about because of this. Later on, we see really kind of some trials that take place as they put Jesus on trial for providing this healing, not just when he does it, but what he claims to be when he does it. And so, verse 1, I think, gives us an example of Jesus's character when he sees the blind man. Blaine, what do you make of how Jesus chooses this particular man?
Yeah, I mean, it's just, it's yet another instance of Jesus being the one that approaches rather than being approached. It just shows his character and shows that he wants us as much as we want him. And I think that's a major theme throughout the Bible and, throughout our lives.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see several times as we've been doing this study. This study's been good for me. I've enjoyed it as well. To see Jesus choose people to go and to provide a healing, to go and have a conversation with, not just that people are coming to him to beg for something, but that he purposefully goes to them. Shows a lot about his character, character that we can learn from. And so Jesus is asked a question from his disciples in verse 2. Who sinned? This man is blind, so there has to be a cause for his being born blind. There's got to be some type of background that causes them to ask this question: Who sinned, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? Chad, what do you think about this question at hand? Who caused this man to have this affliction?
Well, that's a pretty deep question. And I think you have to start kind of with the assumption that they had, which was if you are doing well in life, if you got, the big house and, in our world, you got the nice cars and you've got, the great family and everything's just kind of rocking and rolling for you and everything's smooth sailing, then that means that you have lived a pretty moral life because they had this, equation, I guess, mindset that they live by that said, if I do well, then God's going to treat me well. And so if I've lived a pretty upstanding moral life, that means that God's going to give me good things, material things. In our world, we would probably call that the health and wealth gospel. If you live right and you sow your good seeds, then God's going to bless you with all these great, great things. And so ancient world had the same thought. And so it's a pretty common or a pretty understandable mindset for these folks to come to Jesus and say, well, you're a good teacher and you've got some pretty insightful things to say. You've, been making waves with what you teach. So who do you say, Rabbi? Who sinned, this man or his parents, and who caused him being born blind? So if nice house and nice cars and good family and everything looks great is a sign of you've been a good person, well then blindness or physical issues would be pretty clear indicators that you've done some shady things in your past. What's happened with you? Um, they got a difficult one here because this man wasn't, struck with blindness when he was 20. He was born blind, and so their equation system worldview kind of has a roadblock here because there's nothing this guy could have done in his life that would have caused this blindness. And so they're kind of trying to figure out, maybe honestly trying to figure out what's the root cause of this. We believe that, sin causes God to punish people in certain ways, is their mindset. Well, this guy was punished in this way before he was born. So what's the reasoning here? So it's a pretty tough question that they've got.
So, I think we theologically we might see where they come up with this. This is a problem I think even maybe Job and his friends suffered with. Curse God and die. Obviously, you've done something wrong. What sin have you committed? And Job couldn't figure out any. Exodus 20, verse 5, in the second commandment, um, God says, "Don't bow down to them or serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers on the children to the third and fourth generation." I think we see some reasoning maybe why they had this view. Um, Ezekiel 18, verse 20, the son shall not suffer for the iniquity of the father, nor the father suffer for the iniquity of the son, is a reminder to them about how this all works out. Um, this wasn't the only view as far as how they saw it, but I think it definitely is a understanding of why they got to this point of does karma exist, basically.
Yeah, let me jump back in there.
Yeah.
So N.T. Wright uses like a vending machine metaphor, and he talks about how the typical worldview is like a vending machine. I was out somewhere yesterday and I wanted a pack of, they had they weren't peanut butter crackers, they were white cheddar crackers. I've never had those before. I like white cheddar Cheez-Its and I like peanut butter crackers, and I thought this has got to be good. And so there's a vending machine and it had these white cheddar crackers in there, and I put my coins in and I pushed the buttons and I got exactly what I wanted out. So in their mind, you put the right things in, you push the right buttons, and you get exactly the outcome that you want. The way that would work out is if I, say good words and I'm a kind person and I do good deeds and I'm a helpful, just kind of general person, then I'm going to have kindness returned to me, and I'm going to have people do good things to me, and I'm going to be blessed in those different ways because I've done those good things, and I'm going to receive those good things. And so that's not a bad way to be. I mean, it's not bad to be helpful and kind, but let's not just assume that because I've been helpful and kind, somebody's going to be helpful and kind to me. All right, we see that in the life of Jesus, the most helpful, kind person who ever lived, and was killed because of it. And so Jesus is going to push back on their thought that this is a vending machine approach, where if you just do the right things and say the right words and act the right ways, then you're going to be blessed in great ways in return. That's not how life works. Now, this one is actually in the negative. He's saying, nobody put bad coins in and pushed bad buttons to get the bad thing out of the vending machine. That's not what happened here. I never really picked up on this until studying for this lesson, but they are really probably promoting some kind of karma view here. Not the typical karma that says if you do good things, you get good in return, but the one that says you lived as somebody else in a present life or in a past life, and they really may be thinking that this guy did some really shady things in a past life, and his result, his punishment, was he was born blind. And Jesus is, of course, going to say, no, that's not at all what happened here. Now, if you want to talk about the reasoning, so why was this person born blind? And we could extrapolate that out into our world and say, why do, bad things happen to innocent children? Why are they sometimes born with birth defects? The list of possibilities is endless. And I want to kind of get out in front of this and say, Jesus doesn't answer that here. He doesn't say, well, the parents, drank while they were pregnant, or that's why this. He doesn't give an answer. The Bible's not written really to explain all the reasons for things happen. It's written to help us understand how to move forward. And so the fact of it is that trillions and trillions of decisions happened between creation and AD 30, whenever this event probably takes place, that led to this one child being born with blindness. I don't know what happened. I don't know what all the decisions were, but Jesus is essentially going to say, not telling you why it happened, I'm telling you that it has happened, and watch what God's going to do in response to it.
This is definitely a question that they struggled with, that I think our generation continues to struggle with, and it's always been a question of why do these good things happen? Blaine, you had a thought about what the people's focus was on in this story. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think the disciples were more focused on the condition, and like Chad was saying, that's not really what Jesus focused on, and he didn't really talk about why that occurred or what caused that. So I think he focused more on how God can be glorified in every part of us, including our physical ailments and things of that nature. God may have allowed this child to be born blind. Didn't cause it, but allowed it because through this ailment, eventually, other people could see Christ for who He is.
And so that's actually what verses 3 and 4 says. It wasn't this man's sin or his parents, but so that God and His works could be displayed through this guy. There's a very real way in which without evil, there's no way to show mercy. There's no way to show power over evil. And I think one of the reasons that we see this man here is because Jesus says, it's so that I could show you what God's capable of. It's pretty interesting.
I'm going to push back a little bit on that. I do not believe that God caused this man to be born blind. And I believe when we say He only allowed it, what we mean by that is that Satan has free will, and Satan is the thief who comes to steal, kill, and destroy, in opposition to God, who comes so that they may have life and have it to the full. Well, a man who is born blind does not have life to the full. Right? He's missing a key particle of life, good eyeballs. And so I would say that this is actually a work of Satan. He's come to steal eyesight, and he's destroyed vision, and he had killed really this guy's chance at a normal life. So he's stealing, killing, and destroying with this guy. And Jesus does not accept blame for that. He says it's in verse 3 when he says, this, it's not that they sinned or his parents, but that the works of God might be displayed in him. I think it's a Romans 8:28 issue where God doesn't cause bad things, but He can work all things together for good. And that's what's happening here. My reading is Satan has bound this guy. Most commonly, whenever Jesus comes upon somebody and explains what's happened, Satan has bound this woman for 18 years. I think Satan has bound this guy's eyesight since birth. And Jesus is coming to create in him something new that's just a small picture of what He's doing with the entire universe. Hey, I want to step back too. Just in case it came across that I said there are no consequences for sin. That's not what I said. I said God doesn't punish you for those sins in this way. Now, if I go, drink a bottle of whiskey and then decide I'm going to go drive home and I have a car accident, then the sin of drunkenness does have consequences. All right. But it's not, well, Chad told a lie in a previous life, and so we're going to make him born blind today. That's not what happens. All right. So I just wanted to clear that one up a little bit and put the blame on Satan here and not on God for doing this.
Sure, and I always like to blame Satan because I think he is the cause of the fall. He's the cause of all the turmoil that we have. But it is important to note that I think that God works through that evil. God works through bad situations, just like you said in Romans 8, to show how good He is. And so we have a compare and contrast of the evilness of the world versus the goodness of God. And in the end, I think is where we see this all work out. In the end is Jesus is going to bring light to a bad situation. And this guy could have gone on forever as blind from birth. That doesn't make God any less good. But God is able to show Himself through this situation. And I think God could have showed Himself through the situation either way. There's a comparison of light and dark. You've hit on that a little bit in verses 4 and 5. He says, "We must work the works of Him who sent me while it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. As long as I am in the world, I am the light of the world." What do you make of this comparison and what Jesus says about it?
Yeah, one of the I am statements of Jesus, I think there's 7 of them, and one of them is, I am the light of the world. But that's not at all the first time God has talked about being light or is used light as the picture of what He's coming to do. One of the first words uttered by God is, let there be what? Blaine? Let there be light. Whenever God calls Israel, He tells them, hey, you are supposed to be a light to the world, light to the nations. In Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, the most famous sermon in history, he says to the people, hey, you're still supposed to be light of the world and salt of the earth. And so I think what we're seeing here, well, the other one that I mentioned to you earlier was in John 1, maybe verse 4, where he says, I'm come to be the life and light of men. All right, so Jesus, all the way back to creation, before he was born as human flesh, it's always been about light, realizing that there's a lot of darkness in the world, and God has come to usher out the darkness by shining light in. And he does that with words in Genesis 1. He does it with people in Exodus 20 when he calls Israel and says, you go be light of the nations. He does it by his son in John 1 and in John 9 right here. And he calls the people who follow his son, us, to be the light of the world. All right, so there's something incumbent on us as Christians then to realize there's a lot of darkness out there. And whatever news channel you watch or wherever you fall on the political spectrum, my guess is over the last few days you've seen a lot of darkness out in not just our nation, but in nations all over the world who are protesting these days. There's a lot of darkness there, and it's incumbent upon Christians to see the darkness and shine the light into the darkness. He doesn't tell us exactly what that looks like in June 2020, but he says, go find darkness and go shine the light into the darkness. He also says that night is coming. Did you get that one yet? Night is coming when no man can work, so you got to work while it's day. I think specifically in Jesus' mind, he's thinking, I'm going to the cross, and that's going to be night. That's darkness over all the earth for several hours when it's supposed to be daylight. And so it's a reversal of, the work of God that he's come to do to drive out darkness. At that point, darkness drives out light. But Jesus says, night is coming, but with every night, there's also a morning that comes. And so on Friday, there's darkness at the cross, but Sunday's coming. And bright and early that Sunday morning, Jesus rises from the tomb before the sun rises. All right, and so light is coming back into the world. There will be dark days, but a Christian's job is to shine light while we can work.
And one of the things that Jesus does for this guy is he's been living in darkness, very physically darkness, for quite a while, and we see Jesus give him light. And I think this is the light conversation starts in John 8 and really carries through and is shown in chapter 9. And so when he tells him how to be healed, he says these things about light and dark, and he spits on the ground and he made mud with the saliva. Then he anointed the man's eyes with the mud and said to him, go wash in the pool of Siloam, which means sent. So he went and washed and came back seeing. Blaine, what do you think folks were thinking when Jesus starts to spitting?
Well, I don't know about that society, but in today's society, being spit on or having spit rubbed on you, that's viewed as disrespectful, and we would take offense to that, so those people may have watched that and been offended at what Jesus was doing, but at the end of the day, I don't think that's what Jesus focused on, I think he focused more on just doing the work of his Father, not if he was offending others in doing so. And that's not to say, he was purposely offending people and, seeking ways to offend people, but, he just did everything out of pure love for us, and he lived a life rooted in truth, and oftentimes that ended up offending people.
It seems strange. I'll say that. There's usually, I won't say usually, there's always a reason why I think Jesus does everything he does. One of the big things that we see here, Jesus is, you brought up the 1st of John, Jesus was in the beginning. He is showing that he is as much God as he is human, and he had a place in the creation. And so here I think he is using a combination of dust and water, which is what was used in the creation to create us anyways, to bring light into the world. He was there for that. And in a very real way, I think he is using creation items, part of the creation story, to restore that light to this guy's eyes. There's also some symbolism here of maybe even Naaman's healing by Elisha. go and dip. And he gets offended. Are there not better waters to dip in? And there's a throwback to go and bathe in the the river, the pool of Siloam. In the Naaman story, it's interesting that he says, "My father is a great word. The prophet, it is a great word. The prophet has spoken to you. Will you not do it? Has he actually said to you, wash and be clean?" So he went down and dipped himself 7 times in the Jordan, according to the word of the man of God, and his flesh was restored. And so here we have a guy that Jesus could have said, "Your eyes are healed." I think we see him speak a miracle several times, but reminiscent of creation, restoration. Here we have a heal by being obedient, heal by doing something. I think there's also a connection between this removal of blindness and bathing in water to Christian baptism. I think there's an allusion to that and what's been going on with John and with the baptisms of repentance and things that have been happening. And so the one who I think Jesus is saying, "I'm healing these blind eyes with clay," as the same being who originally formed this man from clay, which is an interesting thought, but also the obedience that comes with washing and being clean. And so this causes some big uproar. I know we're starting to run out of time, but verses 8, they see this change in this man. He's had monumental change. What do you make of their reaction to this healing?
Well, a lot of things, but let me whittle it down to one I can do in like 2 minutes, okay? So, play it back on, if you think about what was present in Genesis 1 in creation, you got the earth is without form and it's dark, and so you've got matter, and that matter seems to be divided up into two kinds of matter. There's dirt and there's water. The Spirit of God hovers over the water. One of the first things you see is let there be light, and let's divide up this water and dirt. So you got dirt, water, and light pretty early in the Bible, like page 1, Genesis 1, you got dirt, water, light. In John 9, you got those same three things: dirt, which becomes dirt with water when Jesus spits on it. And then you've got him saying, well, you're about to have some light. You're about to let there be light, basically, is what he says with his actions. Dirt, water, light in Genesis 1, dirt, water, light in John chapter 9. Like you said, Jesus could have healed this guy just by saying, okay, you can have sight now. He didn't do that. I think he does that for a reason. And the reason seems to be him showing people who were looking, I'm tying this back to creation. All right. I'm creating something new here. This is a recreation kind of deal. Um, and so this guy has a new lease on life. He was created in one way or born in one way, and that way was with blindness. Now Jesus says, well, let's redo this: dirt and water and light. And now you were in a totally different kind of way. You have been recreated. And then people start to say, as a result of recreation, he's been renewed, regenerated, however you want to phrase it. They say in verse 8, is this not the guy who used to sit and beg? Surely this isn't the guy. Surely this isn't the guy that we've always known has been blind and his eyes were messed up. And surely this is not the guy that couldn't see and has been begging and begging and begging. This cannot be the guy. Isn't this the one, right? Surely it's not. And still today, I think we typically, whenever somebody's experienced a change in life, we still probably treat them a lot like their old person more than we should. Just because somebody's been a liar and a cheat and generally a bad person doesn't mean that they can't change. And whenever they do experience change, whenever maybe their eyes are opened, more metaphorically than this guy's physical eyes, whenever they realize they need to change their lives, when they got a wake-up call and they have a come to Jesus meeting and God wrecks their life in some way and they change, and the tree bears fruit, whenever there's fruit of repentance there, I think one of the takeaways that I want to give us is let's recognize that and not look at it with, kind of are we sure this guy's really different, or is this is he faking it? Let's recognize it and celebrate it and enjoy that. a lost soul has come to the Lord. I think that's a really good thing for us to do. And really, it's something that I don't think you have to explain. Why'd you do this? Why are you making this change? Why don't you lie as much as you used to lie? Why don't you steal as whatever? I think the answer is, well, because of Jesus. Through Jesus, this person's made a change. And every time that happens in Scripture, it's something to celebrate and recognize and be proud of. And so I think my encouragement from this is whenever God does something, when he makes an old, stale, stagnant thing new, bright, and fresh, let's celebrate it. If it's our life or somebody else's life, it's a time to celebrate.
Blaine, what final thoughts you got?
Well, you've already kind of hit on it with the talked about baptism a little bit there, but yeah, like Scott was saying, I think it's interesting that he sent the man to wash in water. The water is obviously not the thing doing the healing. Jesus is, but it requires the man to be faithful and go down into the water. And like last week, we see that obedience of this man precedes the miracle of cleansing and healing provided by Jesus. And the same can be said for us. Through Jesus, we have that opportunity for spiritual healing and cleansing. But we likewise have to go into the water to be able to receive that.
It's very interesting, and there's a lot involved with each of these encounters that we've seen with Jesus so far over the last, I guess, maybe 12 weeks that we've been doing this. We constantly see a theme of restoration, of wanting to get back to what we had in the very beginning. There's always a tie back to page 1 of the scriptures. There's always a tie back to how Jesus is going to accomplish that. And I think we see that today, how Jesus heals both physically, but also how he shows us the way to be healed spiritually. How do we reconnect with God? How do we be restored from a blind situation? And Jesus says, I'm the light of the world. And he shows us that way. He is the way, the truth, and the life. We've enjoyed this study from John 9 tonight. I hope it's been informative. I hope it's encouraged you. If nothing else, maybe encourage you to look a little deeper into some of the things that we've been talking about. This week, this Sunday, we will be continuing our services just like last week with 2 services. A through M will come to the 9 a.m. service. N through Z will come to the 10 a.m. service. And we will continue the drive-in service just like we did last week as well over at the parking lot across the street. We hope that we'll see you in one of those services. Chad started a series 2 weeks ago called Little Giants. Little Giants, great movie. Little Giants, and we're going to continue that series this Sunday on little thoughts and how our thoughts lead and make a big impact in our lives. So we look forward to seeing you Sunday, either in person, in a car, or online. We'll see you Sunday.